The price of paradise. What do you do when the man who swore to love and protect you is sipping cocktails in paradise with another woman while you are battling through the most agonizing hours of your life? This isn't a hypothetical question. For Isla Monroe, it was her brutal reality. On one side of the world, she lay in a sterile hospital room, her body being torn apart by the pangs of childbirth. On the other, her billionaire husband, Julian Vaughn, was sunbathing on the Amalfi Coast with his mistress. He thought his lies were as flawless as the sunset he watched. He was wrong. His vacation was about to end. His world was about to burn. The silence in the penthouse on Via Roma was a living thing. It breathed the sterile, filtered air and settled onto the vast expanses of Carrara marble and polished chrome like a fine layer of dust. Isla, 9 months and 6 days pregnant, felt the silence as a physical weight on her chest. From her seat on a custom-designed sofa, she could see the entirety of the Piazza del Popolo unfolding below, a vibrant green tapestry against the gray steel of the city. It was a view that cost a fortune, a view that was supposed to mean she had it all. But today, it only made her feel small and isolated, a porcelain doll in a life-sized dollhouse. Her husband, Julian, was packing. He moved through their cavernous master bedroom with the same predatory, high-energy efficiency he applied to his corporate acquisitions. At 42, Julian was a titan of the tech industry, the celebrated CEO of Novatech. He had a jaw that looked carved from granite, eyes the color of a stormy sea, and a charisma so potent it could bend reality. He had convinced the world his data mining software was about connectivity, not surveillance. And he had convinced Isla that his frequent last-minute business trips were a necessary sacrifice for the empire they were building. "It's just Milan, Ellie," his voice echoed slightly from the bedroom. He emerged, clasping a Patek Philippe watch onto his wrist. He was wearing a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her first car. "One last handshake for the Helios deal. I'll be back before you can miss me." Isla ran a hand over the taut sphere of her belly, where her son was performing a series of aggressive flips. "The doctor said it could be any time, Julian. He specifically said you shouldn't be traveling anymore either." He crossed the living room and knelt before her, his expensive cologne filling the space between them. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. It was a disarming, practiced gesture. "And I will be on the first flight back the second you feel a real contraction. My jet is on standby. You have my word." His eyes were sincere, his expression a perfect mask of concern. He was good. So good. She wanted to believe him. For 5 years, she had built her life around believing him. She had been the perfect wife, graceful, supportive, a gracious hostess, and a silent partner in his relentless ambition. She had overlooked the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the faint scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. She had chalked it up to the pressures of his world, the cost of living in the stratosphere. She had chosen to trust him, but the pregnancy had sharpened her senses, honing a primal intuition she didn't know she possessed. And in this moment, that intuition was screaming. "Milan, huh?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Who are you meeting again?" "Mr. Tanaka." A flicker so slight she would have missed it a year ago, but not now. His eyes held hers for a fraction of a second too long. "It's all a formality. You know how it is." He leaned in and kissed her, a brief, dry brush of lips. "Don't worry, Sophie's on her way. You won't be alone." He stood, grabbing his leather carry-on. "I'll call you as soon as I land. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered to his retreating back. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. The heavy door of the penthouse clicked shut, and the oppressive silence rushed back in. Isla remained in place, listening to the hum of the city far below. Milan, the Helios deal. It all sounded so plausible. Julian was a master of plausible deniability. She pulled her laptop from the side table. The metal felt cold against her skin. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the browser. She wasn't a spy. She wasn't a jealous wife. She was just checking. A verification. She typed in the name of the airline Julian used for his private jet. A quick search of tail numbers, a trick her journalist sister had taught her, pulled up a flight log. A Nova Tech-owned jet had filed a flight plan 2 hours ago. Destination, Amalfi. Not Milan. The air left her lungs in a painful rush. Amalfi. The word conjured images of romantic getaways, of honeymooners and lovers, of turquoise water and white sand beaches. It was the opposite of a stuffy corporate boardroom in Milan. Her mind raced, trying to find an explanation, a reason, a layover, a last-minute change of venue. But the lie had been so specific. Mr. Tanaka. The board. Just then, a sharp, searing pain shot through her lower back, wrapping around her abdomen like a hot steel band. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. It was different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd grown used to. This was a deep, primal contraction that stole her breath and made the billion-dollar view swim before her eyes. Another followed a few minutes later, stronger this time. Her water hadn't broken, but she knew. This was it. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers slick with cold sweat. Her first instinct was to call Julian, to tell him to turn the plane around, that their son was coming. But she stopped, her thumb hovering over his name. He had lied to her. So casually, so completely. If she called him now, what would she be met with? More lies. He would pretend to be in a meeting in Milan, while the sound of crashing waves echoed in the background. The betrayal was a pain more acute than the contraction. It was a cold, jagged shard of ice sliding into her heart. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was her younger sister. Sophie. Soph! Isla breathed a sigh of relief. Hey, just got off the metro. I'll be up in 5. Did the Prince of Lies get off to his fake business meeting okay? Sophie had never trusted Julian. She saw him not as a charismatic titan, but as a narcissistic predator. Isla had always defended him. She'd always accused her sister of being too cynical. But now, he's gone, Soph, Isla said, her voice cracking. Another contraction hit her, and she couldn't suppress a low moan. Ellie, was that? Are you okay? Is it time? I think so, she gasped. And Sophie, he lied. He's not going to Milan. He's going to the Amalfi Coast. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Sophie's voice, stripped of all its usual lightness, came through, cold and hard as steel. It's okay, Ellie. It's okay. Don't you worry. I'm almost there. We're going to handle this. First, we're getting you to the hospital to have this baby. Then, she paused, we are going to burn his kingdom to the ground. Do you think Isla's decision not to call her husband was a moment of strength? Or was it a reaction of pure anger and hurt? A perfect storm. The sterile white walls of the delivery room at Chiron Salud Roma seemed to close in on Isla. Every beep of the fetal heart monitor, every rustle of a nurse's uniform was magnified into a deafening roar. The contractions came faster now, relentless waves of agony that crested and broke, leaving her gasping and shaking in their wake. And through it all, one thought played on an endless loop in her mind. Amalfi. 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 Sophie was a whirlwind of controlled fury. She had taken command the moment she'd entered the penthouse, her face pale with rage on her sister's behalf. She had packed the hospital bag with calm efficiency. She helped Isla into the car, and was now standing guard by her bedside, phone in hand, a grim expression on her face. "Have you tried calling him again?" Isla asked, her voice hoarse. 14 times, Sophie said, not looking up from her screen. "It goes straight to voicemail every time. I'm sorry, I can't take your call at the moment. The pre-recorded message is almost as fake as he is." She had already sent a dozen text messages. "Isla's in labor. We're at Quiron Salud, room 712. Julian, call me. It's happening now. Where the hell are you?" Silence. An hour after they had arrived, a single text message finally came through from Julian. It was clearly sent from an in-flight Wi-Fi service, delayed and impersonal. "Just landed. Brutal flight. Meetings all day. Will call when I can. Kisses to Isla. Hope she's feeling okay." Sophie showed the screen to Isla, her jaw tight. "Hope she's feeling okay. The man has the emotional depth of a puddle." Isla felt a fresh wave of nausea that had nothing to do with childbirth. He was doubling down on the lie. He was on the Amalfi Coast, pretending to be in Milan, starting a long day of meetings. The casualness of the lie was what truly broke her. It implied this wasn't his first time. He was a well-oiled machine of deceit. "He's with someone," Isla whispered, the certainty of it settling deep into her bones. "You don't go to the Amalfi Coast just for a secret vacation when your wife is about to give birth. You go with someone." Sophie's fingers flew across her phone screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. As a freelance investigative journalist, she had a particular set of skills that involved navigating the murky depths of social media and public records. "Who would he go with?" she murmured. "The flight log only lists him and the pilots, no other passengers on the manifest." "His assistant," Isla said suddenly, the name catching in her throat. Elena Santoro." Elena was 26, with sharp blue eyes, a cloud of blonde hair, and an ambition so brazen it was practically a second skin. She had started at Novatech 3 years ago and had risen to become Julian's executive assistant, his gatekeeper, his shadow. Isla had always found her unsettling. The way she looked at Julian, a mixture of admiration and longing. The way she had suddenly adopted a new, more expensive wardrobe, wearing designer shoes and carrying bags that were far above an assistant's pay grade, even a well-paid one. Isla had mentioned it to Julian once, and he had laughed. "I pay her a good bonus, Ellie. She's the best. I need her to look the part." "Elena Santoro," Sophie repeated, typing the name into every search bar she could find. Public Instagram, of course. She wants to be seen. She scrolled through a feed of curated perfection. Rooftop cocktails in Salerno, gallery openings in the Pinedo district, business-class lounges all over the world. It was a visual diary of a life she couldn't afford. And then Sophie stopped, her breath caught. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," she whispered. Her voice was laced with venom. She turned the phone around. The most recent post on Elena's Instagram story was a video uploaded less than an hour ago. It was a short, sweeping clip taken from a private infinity pool. The water was a brilliant turquoise, and in the background, lush green olive groves cascaded down a terraced hill under a sky streaked with the pink and orange of a tropical sunrise. It was unmistakably, iconically, the Amalfi Coast. The camera panned from the view to a pair of champagne flutes propped on the edge of the pool. Then, for a split second, it dipped down, showing 2 pairs of feet in the water. One pair, with perfectly manicured red toenails, was clearly Elena's. The other, larger and distinctively male, was Julian's. Isla knew his feet better than her own. She'd given him countless foot massages after his long days, but it was the caption that delivered the final, fatal blow. A single word, dripping with intimate complacency. Paradise. The air in the hospital room turned to ice. Isla stared at the screen, at the image of her husband's feet entwined with his assistants in an Amalfi paradise, while she lay broken and bleeding in a hospital bed an ocean away. The digital world crashed into the physical, and the betrayal was no longer a suspicion, but a blatant, undeniable fact. A sound escaped her lips, a raw, wounded cry that was part pain, part rage. That, Isla choked, batting the phone away as if it had burned her. That! Bitch! She wanted you to see it, Sophie said, her voice dangerously low. This isn't a mistake, Ellie. This is a declaration of war. She posted it to her public story, not her close friends. She tagged the location. She knew someone would find it. She's forcing him to react. Another contraction tore through Isla, more powerful than any before. She screamed, arching her back. The physical pain, a welcome distraction from the emotional agony that threatened to drown her. A nurse rushed in, her face a mask of professional concern. It's okay, Isla. Your blood pressure is rising. I need you to breathe with me. The nurse soothed, but Isla couldn't breathe. She was suffocating under the weight of it all. The lies, the years of willful ignorance, the image of those 2 pairs of feet in the water. Her perfect golden cage hadn't just been a cage. It had been a stage for a play where she was the fool. Sophie took her hand, her grip fierce. Listen to me, Ellie. Forget him. He doesn't exist. Right now, it's you and your toe. That's all that matters. You are going to get through this, and you are going to be a mother. And when this is over, we will deal with him. I promise you. Isla looked at her sister, at the absolute loyalty burning in her eyes. She squeezed her hand back, a surge of adrenaline piercing through the pain. Sophie was right. Julian had made his choice. He had chosen paradise with his mistress over the birth of his own child. Now it was her turn to choose. She could fall apart, or she could fight. Get me a lawyer, Soph, Isla said through gritted teeth as another contraction began. Not just any lawyer. Get me the best. Get me a shark. Sophie's lips curled into a grim smile. I know just the one, Valentina Rossi. She doesn't just get you a divorce. She gets you vengeance. As the doctor walked in to tell her it was time to push, Isla closed her eyes. She wasn't just pushing to bring her son into the world. She was pushing out the old Ela, the trusting wife, the silent partner. And in her place, a new woman was being born. One forged in the fires of betrayal and galvanized by a mother's righteous fury. Julian Vaughn had no idea what was waiting for him when he came home. Have you ever felt so betrayed that you just wanted to watch the world of the person who hurt you burn? Do you believe vengeance is a valid form of justice? A new dawn. The first cry of her newborn son cut through the cacophony of beeping machines and medical jargon. It was the most pure sound Isla had ever heard. They laid him on her chest, a small, reddish, squirming miracle. And in that instant, the world shrank to the space of her own and his tiny heartbeats. He was here. He was real. He was hers. She named him Leo, after her grandfather, a man of quiet strength and unshakable integrity. Everything his father was not. Holding Leo, Isla felt a profound shift within her. The heartbreak was still there, an open wound. But it was no longer the all-consuming emotion. It had knit together and was being rapidly overshadowed by a fierce, protective love, as elemental as granite. This perfect little being was completely dependent on her. She was his entire world, and she would not allow him to be raised in the shadow of lies and deceit. Sophie had been a rock, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, and capturing the first moments of Leo's life on her phone, not for Julian, but for Isla. While Isla rested and a nurse helped her with the baby, Sophie stepped out into the hallway. Her fingers danced across her phone screen as she made the call that would change everything. Rossi City Law Office. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "My name is Sophie Martin. I need to speak to her urgently. It's a personal matter on behalf of my sister, Isla Monroe. Her husband is Julian Vaughn." The mention of those names worked like a key in a lock. There was a brief hold. Then a new voice came on the line. A low, smooth voice that radiated an almost unsettling level of authority. "This is Valentina Rossi." "Ms. Rossi," Sophie began, "my sister just gave birth to her son. Her husband, Julian Vaughn, is currently on the Amalfi Coast with his executive assistant, a woman named Elena Santoro. He told my sister he was in Milan on business. We have proof of the affair and his location. Isla wants to file for divorce." There was a pause. Sophie could almost hear the gears turning in the legendary lawyer's mind. Valentina Rossi, known in elite Rome circles as the Shark, had handled the most contentious, high-profile divorces in the city. She was brilliant, ruthless, and impossibly expensive. She didn't just win cases. She eviscerated her opponents. "Does he know you are aware of the situation?" Valentina asked. "No. He's completely in the dark. He thinks we're still buying his Milan story." "And the proof?" "Time-stamped photos from the Mistress's public Instagram account, geotagged to the Amalfi Coast, a copy of the jet's flight log, and a string of text messages from him lying about his whereabouts while my sister was in active labor." "Excellent," Valentina said, the word cutting through the line. "Tell your sister to rest. Tell her not to contact him under any circumstances. No angry texts, no tearful phone calls. Complete and total silence. He must not hear a thing from her. Am I clear?" "Crystal," Sophie replied. "I'll have a retainer agreement sent to the hospital in less than an hour. My team is already pulling every financial document related to Mr. Vaughn that we can get our hands on. Let him enjoy his vacation. It will be his last." Meanwhile, in a €5,000 a night private villa at the Hotel Marincanto on the Amalfi Coast, Julian Vaughn was indeed enjoying himself. He floated on his back in the infinity pool, a cold San Miguel beer sweating in his hand. The tropical sun warmed his skin. Elena Santoro, in a tiny bikini, swam over and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You seem tense," she purred, kissing his chin. "Still thinking about work?" "Just feeling a little guilty, that's all," Julian sighed, pulling her closer. Isla could go into labor at any time. Elena rolled her eyes, a calculated flash of annoyance in her blue eyes. "Julian, we've talked about this. You deserve this. You've worked your butt off for a year. What has she done? Planned a few dinner parties. Her biggest stress is picking out baby room furniture. You needed a real break with someone who understood your world." Her words were a comforting balm to his conscience. Elena was smart, ambitious, and made him feel like the king he believed himself to be. Isla, especially during the pregnancy, had become different, softer, more focused on the baby, less on him. And his empire. It was boring. I know. It's just bad timing. There's never a perfect time," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Isn't it time you stopped feeling guilty? You and I are the truth. She is just an obligation. A beautiful, expensive obligation you have already outgrown." This was the narrative Elena had been spinning for months. This wasn't just an affair. She was his intellectual and spiritual partner. She had positioned herself as his savior, the only one who truly understood the burdens of his genius. She had orchestrated this trip, convincing him it was necessary. She had even been the one to subtly suggest he tell Isla he was going to Milan, a place that sounded more like work and less like pleasure. And she had been the one to post the Instagram story. It was a calculated risk. She knew Julian's world was hermetically sealed. He assumed no one in their Rome circle would be looking at his assistant's social media. But Alina knew better. In the digital age, there were no secrets. She had seen the way Isla's sister looked at her, the undisguised suspicion. She was counting on Sophie to be her unwitting messenger. Alina no longer wanted to be a secret. She wanted to be the next Mrs. Julian Vaughn. This was her power move. "I should probably call," Julian said, heaving himself out of the pool and reaching for his phone. He saw the string of missed calls and text messages from Sophie. A cold jolt of panic shot through him. He opened the last one. "Where the hell are you?" "Damn it," he muttered. "What is it?" Elina asked, feigning concern. "Isla's in labor. Sophie's been texting me for hours." He began to pace the pool deck, his mind racing. "Why didn't you get this sooner? The service here is terrible, remember?" Elina said smoothly, having already anticipated this. "You said so yourself." He quickly typed a reply. His hands were shaking slightly. He couldn't fly back to Rome with an Amalfi Coast tan. He needed to keep the lie going. "Just saw these. My phone was off in meetings all day. This is incredible news. How is she? Has the baby arrived yet? On my way to the airport now. Tell her and the baby I love them, and I'm on my way." He hit send, the lie flowing from him with practiced ease. He turned to Alina. "I have to go. The jet needs to be refueled. I need a flight plan back to Rome, but with a layover first. Somewhere cold. Oslo," Elena suggested, a sly smile on her lips. "You could say the Milan meeting ran long, and you had to reroute through Norway for a side deal. Nobody gets a tan in Oslo." He looked at her. A slow smile spread across his face. "God, you're brilliant." He pulled her in and kissed her hard. "Pack your things. We'll drop you in Barcelona on the way. I need you back at the office, holding down the fort. Delete everything. All the photos, the hotel bookings off your personal cards. Everything." "Don't worry," Elina said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "By the time you land, it will be like the Amalfi Coast never existed." As Julian scrambled to cover his tracks, convinced he was one step ahead, he had no idea that, an ocean away, a team of forensic accountants hired by Valentina Rossi was already unearthing the web of shell companies and offshore accounts he used to hide his personal expenses, including the 5-figure cost of the Amalfi Villa, paid for not as a personal expense, but as a Novatech corporate retreat. The trap was being set, the shark was circling, and the prey was swimming directly into it. Do you think Julian underestimated the power of a woman's intuition? Or did he simply become overconfident in his own cunning? The fall of the king. The Gulf Stream G160 descended through the clouds over Rome, the familiar city skyline rising up to meet it. Julian Vaughn adjusted his tie and ran a hand through his hair. He felt a pang of genuine excitement. He was going to be a father. He imagined walking into the hospital room, flowers in hand, full of apologies about the unavoidable and momentous business in Milan. Hila would be tired, but she would forgive him. She always did. He would hold his son for the first time, and this whole messy Amalfi business would be forgotten, a secret kept between him and Alina. He had spent 2 hours on the tarmac in Oslo, making a series of frantic, backdated business calls to sell the lie. He'd even bought a cheap airport snow globe as a prop. He was ready. His story was flawless. As the jet taxied to the private hangar at Barajas Airport, he saw a sleek black car waiting on the tarmac. Good. His driver was here. Everything was going according to plan. The jet door opened, and the cool Rome air hit him. He took a deep breath, sliding into the role of the devoted husband returning home to his family. He descended the steps, his leather carry-on in hand. But as he reached the bottom, it wasn't his usual driver who stepped from the car. It was a woman he didn't recognize, dressed in an impeccably cut gray pantsuit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bob. Her expression was completely devoid of emotion. Behind her, two large men with stone-cold faces and dark suits emerged from the vehicle. "Julian Vaughn?" the woman asked. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass. "Yes," Julian said, confused. "Who are you?" He looked past her, expecting his driver to appear. "My name is Valentina Rossi," she said, her eyes locking with his. "I am your wife's attorney." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. "Your wife's attorney?" The phrase made no sense. Why would Isla have an attorney? An attorney like Valentina Rossi, whose name he knew from the gossip pages, always linked to the city's most brutal legal, corporate, and marital battles. I don't understand," he stammered, his carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. "I think you do," Rossi said coolly. She gave a slight nod to one of her men. He stepped forward and handed Julian a thick manila envelope. Julian stared at it, his hand frozen in the air. "What is this?" "That is a summons and complaint for divorce," Valentina stated, her voice flat. "On the grounds of adultery, among other things. It also contains a temporary restraining order preventing you from accessing or transferring any marital assets, and an injunction barring you from access to the Via Roma residence. You are not to go home, Mr. Vaughn, and you are not to contact my client in any manner." Julian's mind reeled. Adultery. Restraining order. How? How could she know? It was impossible. He had covered his tracks. Elena had deleted everything. "This is insane," he spluttered, finally finding his voice. "There's been a mistake. My wife just had a baby. I was in Milan on business. I can prove it." He gestured vaguely with the hand holding the Oslo snow globe. Valentina Rossi allowed herself a small, cold smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "Ah, yes, Milan. And I suppose the layover in Oslo was for the polar bear convention." She took another step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Allow me to save you the trouble of further perjury. We have your jet's flight records to the Amalfi Coast. We have the receipts from the Hotel Marincanto, charged to a shell company as a Nova Tech team-building exercise. And we have a beautiful high-definition screenshot of Ms. Santoro's Instagram story, with your feet enjoying the paradise you chose instead of attending the birth of your son." Each word was a hammer blow, systematically demolishing his reality. He felt the blood drain from his face. He looked past Rossi, his eyes desperately scanning the area, and that's when he saw them. At the edge of the private tarmac, just far enough away to be legal, was a small group of photographers. Their long lenses were aimed directly at him. One of them, he recognized, a notorious paparazzi who worked for the gossip pages. And standing near them, watching the scene with an expression of cold satisfaction, was his sister-in-law, Sophie. She raised her phone as if to toast him before turning away. He had walked directly into a perfectly executed ambush. "You can't do this," he whispered, the words sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "Isla, she wouldn't. You have fundamentally misunderstood the woman you married." "Mr. Vaughn," Rossi interrupted. "You thought she was a decoration. You were wrong. She is the queen, and you have been cast from the kingdom." She turned, her job done, and walked back to the car. Without looking back, one of the big men opened the back door for Julian, his expression making it clear this wasn't a request. Numb, Julian slid into the leather seat. The manila envelope felt as if it weighed 100 pounds. He opened it. His hands were shaking violently. The legal jargon swam before his eyes, but the words were clear. Irreconcilable differences, extreme cruelty, adultery. Attached were the proofs. Exhibit A, A printout of the flight log to the Amalfi Coast. Exhibit B, a copy of the hotel bill. Exhibit C, a crisp color photograph of his and Alina's feet in the infinity pool. The word paradise mocked him from the bottom of the page. The car pulled away from the hangar, leaving his private jet on the tarmac like a monument to his stupidity. As they headed for the highway, his phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. The screen lit up with notifications. El País, The World, Khorasan Magazine. The headlines were brutal. Tech mogul Julian Vaughn served divorce papers on airport tarmac amid cheating allegations. Nova Tech CEO in hot water. After skipping son's birth for Amalfi getaway with assistant. Inside the divorce, Julian Vaughn, a story of lies, luxury, and betrayal. He had flown home thinking he was the king returning to his castle, but the locks had been changed. The drawbridge was up, and his kingdom was on fire. He was not a king. He was just a man sitting in the back of a car with an Oslo snow globe. Finally, irrevocably, caught. Do you think Julian got what he deserved? Or was the punishment too severe? How would you have handled the situation if you were Isla? The rise of the Queen, the fallout, was immediate and catastrophic. The stories, fueled by Sophie's anonymous but well-placed leaks, and Valentina Rossi's strategic precision, created a media storm that Julian Vaughn could not control. The narrative was too compelling. The billionaire mogul, the beautiful wife in labor, the illicit tropical tryst with the young assistant. It was a morality play for the modern age, and Julian was cast as the irredeemable villain. The Nova Tech Board of Directors, a collection of serious-faced men and women who cared more about profit than a good story, called an emergency meeting. The scandal wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It was a direct threat to the company's image. Valentina Rossi had made sure they knew the Amalfi trip was paid for with corporate funds disguised as business expenses. This act of embezzlement, combined with the public relations nightmare, was a breach of his fiduciary duty. Novatech's stock price plummeted 20% in 2 days. Before the week was out, Julian Vaughn was forced to take an indefinite leave of absence from the company he had built. He was locked out of his own empire. Elena Santoro disappeared. Unceremoniously fired from her position and named in the divorce proceedings, she became a pariah. Her dream of becoming the next Mrs. Vaughn had evaporated. She had lit the match, hoping to warm herself by the fire, but had instead been consumed by the inferno. She deactivated her social media and vanished, her 15 minutes of infamy over. Julian, holed up in a suite at the Palace Hotel, tried to fight back. He hired a team of equally ruthless attorneys. They attempted to paint Isla as a vengeful gold digger, but the strategy failed spectacularly. Valentina Rossi was always one step ahead. The case hinged on their prenuptial agreement, which was believed to be ironclad. It guaranteed Isla a generous settlement, but not one that would upend his kingdom. But Valentina had found the loophole, a little-known fidelity clause that Julian's own arrogant lawyers had included out of habit. It stated that in the event of proven adultery that led to a public scandal and damaged the family's reputation, the financial limitations of the prenup would be null and void. Julian had signed it without a second thought, never believing he could be caught so flagrantly. It was the ultimate Trojan horse. His own hubris was the weapon that would bring him down. Facing a protracted, humiliating public trial that he was certain to lose, Julian was forced to settle. It was one of the largest divorce settlements in the history of Rome. Isla Monroe was no longer just a millionaire's wife. She was, in her own right, an exceptionally wealthy woman. But Isla cared little for the money itself. For her, it was about justice. It was about security for her son. As the legal battle raged in courtrooms and boardrooms, her world had grown small and wonderfully focused. Her universe was the quiet of the penthouse, which the court had granted her, and the scent of her baby's skin. It was the soft weight of Leo sleeping on her chest, his tiny fingers curled around her own. She learned the rhythm of his needs, the language of his cries. She found a strength she never knew she had, a deep well of resilience and love that had lain untapped during her years as Julian's wife. Her sister Sophie was a constant presence, a devoted aunt who delighted in making Leo laugh. The silence of the penthouse was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. The view of the Piazza del Popolo was no longer a symbol of isolation. It was a promise of strolls in the sun, of a future she would build for herself, on her own terms. 6 months after that fateful day at the airport, Isla sat on the same custom-designed sofa where her old life had ended, dressed not in designer evening wear, but in comfortable cashmere. Leo was sleeping soundly in his bassinet beside her. On the coffee table in front of her was not a stack of invitations to social galas, but a business proposal. Using a portion of the settlement, she was establishing a foundation. The Monroe Foundation would be dedicated to providing legal aid and financial support to women and children victimized by powerful men, women who didn't have a Valentina Rossi to call or the resources to fight back. It was a new purpose forged from her pain. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Julian Vaughn had sold his remaining shares in Novatech and was reportedly relocating to Dubai, a place with no extradition treaties and a tolerance for disgraced titans. He was a ghost, a whispered warning at cocktail parties. Isla looked at the headline, then dismissed the notification without a second thought. He was a chapter of her life that was now closed. She looked at her son, then back at the proposal in her hands. The sun streamed in through the vast windows, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. For the first time in a long time, Isla Monroe felt truly free. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself, and her own rise was just beginning. What does freedom mean to you? Do you believe Isla found true freedom in her new life? The final showdown. 4 years later, Isla Monroe's name was no longer synonymous with scandal, but with power. Not the borrowed, reflected power of a millionaire's wife, but a genuine, hard-won influence she wielded with grace and precision. The Monroe Foundation had grown into a formidable force in Rome philanthropy, a sanctuary and a sword for women navigating the dangerous intersection of domestic strife and financial disparity. Isla was no longer a societal footnote. She was a featured figure in Forbes, celebrated for her strategic acumen and unyielding commitment. The Via Roma penthouse, once her golden cage, was now her fortress and command center. Leo, now a boisterous, bright 4-year-old, with his mother's warm eyes and a stubborn chin she privately admitted came from his father, was the sun in her universe. His life was a happy rhythm of preschool drop-offs, afternoons in the Piazza del Popolo, and quiet evenings filled with picture books and sprawling Lego creations on the marble floors. He knew nothing of the Amalfi Coast, of restraining orders, of the man whose DNA he shared. For Leo, his world was complete. It consisted of his mother, his Aunt Sophie, and a loving circle of friends. Julian Vaughn was not a ghost in their home. He wasn't even a memory. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Isla was at the Foundation's downtown office, a modern, sleek space a world away from the opulent sterility of Novatech. She was deep in a file, a particularly nasty one, that involved a real estate mogul trying to use his wealth to bankrupt his wife to take custody of their children. It was a story Isla understood in her bones. Her assistant buzzed her. "Ms. Monroe, Valentina Rossi is on line 1. She says it's urgent. Isla felt a familiar prickle of apprehension. Valentina's calls were rare and never trivial. She picked up the receiver. Valentina, what's happened? Isla. Valentina's voice was as calm and sharp as ever. He's back. Isla didn't need to ask who he was. A cold knot formed in her stomach, an unwelcome echo of a life she had long put behind her. He's back where? In Rome. He landed at Barajas this morning. His lawyers have already contacted my office. He's petitioning the court for visitation rights. The audacity was breathtaking. For 4 years, Julian had not sent a single birthday card. He had made no attempt to contact Leo, adhering to the original divorce settlement which had granted Itla exclusive legal and physical custody, with no mandatory visitation for him. A concession he had made easily at the time, desperate to make the scandal go away. On what grounds? Isla asked, her voice dangerously low. The usual, Valentina said with a sigh. He claims he's a changed man. He's spent the last few years doing some soul-searching and rehabilitating his character. He says he has a right to know his son. His lawyers are trying to frame our original settlement as something he was coerced into at a time of extreme duress. Duress he completely brought on himself. Isla seethed, the anger burning hot and fast. I take it his ventures in Dubai didn't go well? My sources say he blew through most of his capital, trying to launch a new tech startup that failed spectacularly, Valentina confirmed. He's not bankrupt, not by a long shot, but he's no longer in the Novatech stratosphere. He's a diminished man, and diminished men often look to the past to reclaim a sense of power. He is not getting it from me or my son, Isla said, her resolve hardening like steel. Fight him, Valentina. Use everything we have. Of course, Valentina said. But Isla, he's going to try to take this to the media, the desperate plea of a father. He will try to paint you as the cold, vengeful woman keeping a son away from his repentant father. You must be prepared for that. The warning came too late. By the time Isla arrived home that evening, the first salvo had already been fired. A source close to Julian Vaughn had leaked a story to a major tabloid. The headline was sickeningly predictable. Repentant mogul returns to Spain to fight for son. He never knew. The article was a masterpiece of manipulation, full of quotes about Julian's deep regret and his unconditional love for a child he had only seen in paparazzi photos. Sophie was waiting for her in the penthouse, her face a storm. The snake has come out of hiding, she spat, holding up her tablet, showing her the article. How dare he? It's a tactic, Soph. He's trying to get to me, to force a reaction, Isla said, taking off her coat. She went to the window, looking out at the city lights. She felt the old rage, the familiar sting of betrayal. But it was different now. It was a controlled burn, not a wildfire. She was no longer the woman who broke down. She was the woman who strategized. The next few weeks were an exhausting war of attrition, waged through lawyers and press releases. Julian gave a carefully staged interview to a sympathetic television journalist, his eyes filled with practiced sincerity as he spoke of his mistakes and his longing to be a father. He looked older, his face thinner, the trademark charisma now tinged with a desperate edge. He never attacked Itla directly, but instead painted her as an understandably hurt woman he hoped would one day find it in her heart to forgive him for their son's sake. It was a brilliant performance. Public opinion, fickle, began to fluctuate. Online comments began to question whether it was right to keep a son from his father forever, regardless of the father's past sins. Isla, following Valentina's strict advice, remained silent. She gave no interviews. She issued no statements. She continued her work. She was photographed taking Leo to the park and presented a facade of serene, unshakable confidence. Her silence was more powerful than any denial. It communicated that Julian Vaughn's drama was beneath her. The first court hearing was a circus. Media swarmed the courthouse steps. Julian arrived in a somber suit, looking like a man ready to immolate himself. Isla arrived flanked by Valentina Rossi, her expression unreadable, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Inside the judge's chamber, the arguments were laid out. Julian's lawyers spoke of a father's fundamental rights. Valentina Rossi spoke of a father who had abdicated those rights the moment he boarded a plane to the Amalfi Coast. She spoke of 4 years of complete and total silence, of the lack of any financial or emotional support beyond what was court-ordered. She painted a picture not of a repentant father, but of a failed businessman, grasping for a new lifeline, a new way back into the public eye, using his son as a pawn. Then, Valentina played her trump card, a ghost from Julian's past, whom Isla never thought she'd hear from again. "Your Honor," Valentina said, "we would like to submit a sworn statement from Ms. Elena Santoro." A stunned silence fell over the room. Julian's face went white. Valentina continued, "Ms. Santoro, who is currently residing in Seville under her married name, has provided a statement detailing how Mr. Vaughn pressured her into signing an NDA after their divorce, paying her a substantial sum to remain silent. More pertinently, it details numerous conversations during their time together in which Mr. Vaughn referred to his unborn son as a complication and a future obligation. He expressed zero interest in the child beyond the heir he was expected to produce. His trip to the Amalfi Coast, she states, was specifically planned as one last fling before he was tied down. There was never any intention of returning for the birth. Valentina let the words hang in the air. The sworn statement systematically dismantled Julian's narrative as the grieving, repentant father. It exposed him for what he was, a narcissist whose only regret was getting caught. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, read the affidavit. Her expression grew colder with each page. She looked at Julian, a long, assessing stare. "Mr. Vaughn," the judge said, her voice dripping with disapproval, "you gave up your right to a say in your son's life 4 years ago. Your recent return and sudden interest feel less like paternal concern and more like a publicity stunt. The court's petition is denied. My advice to you is to return to the life you have built and leave this family in peace." It was over. The gavel came down with a final, decisive thud. Julian sat stunned, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His gambit had failed. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated all of them. Isla and Valentina walked out of the courtroom into the flash of cameras. Isla didn't smile. She simply held her head high and got into her car. As she drove away, she saw him emerge, his face crumpled in defeat, surrounded by reporters yelling questions he couldn't answer. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met across the chaotic scene. She saw no remorse in his gaze, only the bitter rage of a king who had lost his kingdom for a second and final time. That night, after putting Leo to bed, Isla poured 2 glasses of wine and sat with Sophie on the terrace overlooking the park. "To victory," Sophie said, raising her glass. "And to Elena Santoro, who knew she'd end up being our secret weapon." Isla smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "People change, Soph. Or maybe they just get tired of the lies." She sipped her wine, the cool liquid a soothing balm. "He's gone, for good this time. What do you think he'll do now?" Isla looked out at the endless sea of city lights, at the empire of glass and steel. It was a city that had witnessed her fall and her rise. "I don't know," she said honestly, and for the first time, I genuinely don't care. She had faced the ghost of her past and not flinched. She had protected her son. She had defended her peace. The echoes of Julian Vaughn were finally fading, replaced by the sounds of her own life, the gentle hum of her foundation doing its work, the distant laughter from her son's room, and the steady, sure beat of her own heart. Her rise was complete. She was home. Isla's story is a raw and powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can forge the most unshakable strength. She was pushed to the brink, abandoned at her most vulnerable, yet she refused to be a victim. Instead, she transformed her pain into power, not just for herself, but for countless others. Her journey shows us that true wealth is not measured in stock prices or penthouses, but in resilience, integrity, and the courage to rebuild your kingdom from the ashes of a life that was burned to the ground. What do you think was the single most powerful moment in this story? Let me know, and we can discuss it more.
What happens when the person who knows all your secrets uses them to call you worthless? Elena Hayes wasn't just divorced. She was deleted. Her ex-husband, Mark Vane, took her research, her youth, and her dignity, leaving her with one word: useless. He thought he'd buried her in the wreckage of their marriage, stepping over her to build his new shiny life. He never expected she'd be unearthed by the one man he was desperate to impress. This is the story of how a single quiet word from a billionaire in front of the entire world turned one woman's ruin into her ultimate revenge. The final meeting wasn't in a courtroom. It was in the sterile, beige-walled office of a mediator, a place designed to have no personality, no memory. It was perfect. Elena Hayes sat opposite Mark Vane, her husband of 12 years, her ex-husband, in precisely 7 more minutes. The mediator, a woman named Ms. Peterson, was droning on about asset division. But all the assets had already been divided. Mark, in a gesture of magnanimity, had bought her out of their Upper East Side apartment, the one she had found decorated and turned into a showpiece, for a sum that was technically fair, but felt like an insult. He had given her, as he'd phrased it to his lawyer, everything she needed to start over. What he meant was a check small enough to be a leash, forcing her to find a new life, but ensuring it would be a small one. Mark checked his watch, a rose gold Patek Philippe, the one she'd saved for 3 years to buy him after his first big deal. He wore it like a trophy of his own success. "Is that everything, Pamela?" he asked, cutting the mediator off. "I have a 2 o'clock at the new offices." "Almost, Mr. Vane," Ms. Peterson said, peering over her glasses. "We just need Mrs. Hayes. Elena's signature on the addendum regarding the art collection." Elena's stomach tightened. The art collection was 3 prints she'd bought at a student auction when she was still working on her doctorate at Columbia, before Mark. "She can have them," Mark said, waving a dismissive hand. "They're worthless." A tiny, sharp sound escaped Elena's throat. It was almost a laugh. Mark's eyes, once warm now, a flat, polished blue, snapped to hers. "What?" "Nothing, Mark. Just nostalgic. I remember you liked that Kandinsky print." "I liked it when we were 25 and living in a 4th-floor walk-up, Elena. My tastes have evolved." He gestured to his own bespoke suit. "I'm now in the business of originals, not dorm room posters." "They're not worthless," she said, her voice quiet. "The provenance on the small lithograph is interesting." Mark leaned forward, and the air crackled with the familiar acidic condescension she hadn't realized she'd been dreading. Elena let it go. "You were good at the hobby, the little research papers, the interesting provenance. But that's not the real world. In the real world," he tapped the mahogany table, "value is what a buyer is willing to pay, and no one is paying for your opinions." He smiled, a tight corporate pulling of the lips. "It's why this is for the best. I'm in the yes business. I build things. I make deals. And you, well, you were always in the no business. No mark that's not historically accurate. No mark the research doesn't support that. You're an anchor, Elena. A very lovely, very educated, and completely useless anchor. There it was, the word, the one he had been dancing around for months, the one that had echoed in the silence of their apartment as he stayed out later and later, his phone buzzing with names she didn't know, the one that summed up her entire sacrifice. She had been the one to ghostwrite the proposals that won him his first clients. Her art history research, her understanding of cultural narratives had been the secret sauce for his Vane Global Strategies consulting firm. She had built his database. She had networked for him. She had given up her dissertation, her life's work on obscure Dutch masters, to be his unpaid, uncredited partner. And now she was useless. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking, but not from sadness. It was the adrenaline of a 1,000-volt shock. She signed her name Elena Hayes for the last time. "You're right, Mark," she said, standing up. She pushed the papers across the table. "My opinions are worthless. To you." She walked out of the room, leaving him with the mediator. She didn't look back. She walked past the sleek minimalist reception area, out the glass doors, and onto the pavement of Lexington Avenue. The noise of the city hit her like a physical blow. She was 38 years old. She had a master's degree in art history, half a dissertation, and a check that would barely cover a year's rent in a decent neighborhood. Mark Vane was already in his chauffeured Escalade, probably taking a call, probably laughing. He had his new office, his new clients, and, as she'd seen on page 6, his new girlfriend, a 22-year-old influencer named Chloe, who was famous for, well, Elena couldn't figure out for what. Elena Hayes was, for the first time in her adult life, completely and utterly alone. And a voice in her head whispered completely and utterly useless. The first 6 months were a blur of beige boxes, beige walls in her new tiny studio in Astoria, Queens, the beige, tasteless coffee from the bodega on the corner. Elena had sold the 3 worthless prints. The small lithograph, the one with the interesting provenance, had been misattributed. Her research had been correct. It wasn't a student piece. It was a preparatory sketch for a much larger lost work. It sold at a minor Christie's auction for $42,000. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was hers. And it was enough to keep the wolves at bay for another year. It was the first breath she'd taken since the mediator's office. But the silence of the 400-square-foot apartment was deafening. Her entire life had been built around Mark. His schedule, his dinners, his clients, his needs. Now, with that scaffolding gone, she felt formless. She would go for days without speaking to anyone. The useless label had burrowed under her skin like a parasite. Mark had been so effective in his dismissal that he had in effect erased her. She would look at the Columbia University website at the page for the art history department and feel a wave of nausea. She was a fraud, a dropout, a failed academic who had become a failed wife. One rainy Tuesday in April, she was staring at her blank laptop screen, a job application for junior executive assistant glowing mockingly when her phone buzzed. It was an email from an old college acquaintance, Sarah. Subject: job. Gagosian. You interested the Gagosian, the gleaming billion-dollar behemoth of the art world. Elena opened the email. It wasn't for a curator. It wasn't for a researcher. It was for a gallery assistant and archivist. The job description was glorified data entry with a side of fetching coffee. It was a job for a 22-year-old recent graduate. It paid, she noted grimly, barely enough to live on. She closed the laptop. It was beneath her. She had debated esoteric points of 17th-century pigment composition with the world's leading experts. She had been published in minor journals. She was also, she realized, staring at a half-eaten container of stale lo mein. She opened the laptop and wrote back to Sarah. I'm very interested. Thank you. The interview was humbling. The director, a terrifyingly chic woman named Diana, didn't even look at her resume. Sarah speaks highly of you, Diana had said, not looking up from her screen. But you're mature for this role, and you've been out of the game for She finally looked at the paper. 12 years. What exactly have you been doing? I was a private consultant, Elena said, the lie tasting like ash. For a global strategies firm. Ah, Diana said, her eyes instantly glazing over. Corporate. Boring. Elena saw the interview slipping away. She had one shot. But my specialty, Elena said, her voice finding a sudden steel edge, was provenance. Specifically post-Renaissance European. For instance, the Lost Muse attributed to Van Honthorst that sold at Sotheby's last fall. It was a fake. The pigment analysis was flawed, the canvas weave was 18th century, not 17th, and the subject's stomacher was a design that didn't exist until 1650. The painting was dated 1632. Diana's head came up, slowly. She had been at that auction. She had almost bid on that painting. How did you know that? I wrote a paper on it, Elena said. It wasn't published. It was for my private consultant. Diana stared at her for a long silent minute. You'll be cataloging our digital archives. It's tedious. And you'll be on the front desk 3 days a week. You'll answer phones. You'll get coffee for clients. You'll be invisible. The pay is $48,000 a year. When do I start? Elena asked. The next 3 months were the hardest of her life. She was, as promised, invisible. She was Ellie, or Anna, or just you, to the impossibly young, impossibly rich, and impossibly arrogant assistants who swarmed the gallery. She was 39, wore a simple black sheath dress from a thrift store, and fetched $12 almond milk lattes for 24-year-olds named Arabella. She spent her nights in the digital archives. The Gagosian system was a mess. Decades of high-value transactions stored with all the care of a teenager's iTunes library. Elena worked. She worked with the quiet, furious focus of a woman with nothing else. She cross-referenced. She built new taxonomies. She found mislabeled files, missing provenance records, and 2 instances of works that had been sold twice. She didn't tell anyone. She just fixed it. She created a new encrypted and intuitive system. Mark, she heard, had landed a massive new client. She saw him and Chloe in Vogue at some gala. He was quoted in the Wall Street Journal as a visionary in global logistics. His new catchphrase was, "Connecting the past to the future." Elena deleted the article, drank her beige coffee, and went back to work. She was just an archivist, just a coffee fetcher, just a useless anchor doing a useless, invisible job. The first time she saw Damian Blackwood, she didn't know who he was. He was just an anomaly. It was a Thursday, her day at the front desk. The gallery was quiet, shimmering in the late afternoon sun. He walked in without a security detail, which was unusual. He wore a simple dark gray t-shirt and jeans. This was not unusual. The uniform of the billionaire was intentional norm-core. But his clothes fit him with a bespoke perfection that cost more than her annual salary. The real anomaly was his silence. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at his phone. He just looked. He stood in front of a massive, chaotic Anselm Kiefer painting for a full 10 minutes. Elena, used to clients who photographed the art before they'd even seen it, watched him on the security monitor. He wasn't just looking, he was reading it. He moved to the next piece, a delicate, unnerving sculpture by a new artist. He didn't circle it. He just found the correct viewing angle and stayed there. Elena was so engrossed in watching him watch, she didn't realize Diana, the gallery director, was sprinting from her office, a fixed, terrified smile on her face. "Mr. Blackwood, we weren't expecting you." Diana's voice was 3 notes higher than usual. Blackwood. Elena's blood went cold. Damian Blackwood. Not just rich, but foundational. Blackwood Holdings was in everything from global shipping to satellite technology. He was a ghost, a myth. He never did interviews. He never went to galas. He was supposedly the largest private collector of antiquities and modern art in the world, but no one knew what he owned because he never lent anything to museums. And he was here, in her gallery. "Diana," he said. His voice was low, and it carried. He didn't turn to her. This sculpture. The provenance is listed as Private European Collection. Which one? Ah, well, Mr. Blackwood, as you know, our sellers value discretion. It's the von Hess collection, Blackwood stated. It was looted by the Nazis in 1941, disappeared in 45, and resurfaced in Zurich in the 80s. This is from the Zurich find. You're selling stolen art. The silence in the gallery was so complete Elena could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Diana was paper white. I assure you, our records are... The provenance was cleared. Your records are wrong, Blackwood said. He wasn't angry. He was just stating a fact. It was more terrifying than yelling. He finally turned to Diana. I was considering a purchase. I am no longer. You should call your lawyers. He started to walk to the door. This was it. The Gagosian was about to be blacklisted by the most important collector alive. A scandal would erupt. Diana's career would be over. Elena's job, her fragile new life, would be gone. He's wrong. Elena said it. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them. They were quiet, but in the echoing silence they sounded like a gunshot. Damian Blackwood stopped. He turned his head, not his body. His eyes, a very pale, clear gray, found her at the desk. He didn't look surprised. He just looked attentive. Diana looked like she was going to be physically ill. Elena, be quiet. He's wrong, Elena said again, her voice stronger. She stood up. Her knees were shaking. Mr. Blackwood, you are respectfully incorrect. It is not from the von Hess collection. You're right that the private European collection is a red flag for the Zurich find. But this piece, she pointed, is from the artist's red period, which she only began in 1946 after she fled Berlin. The von Hess collection was catalogued in 1941. This piece couldn't have been in it. She walked on autopilot to the gallery's computer. Her fingers flew. She was in the archives. Her archives. The artist's own studio diaries, which were only translated in 2011, reference this specific sculpture. She gifted it to her patron, a baker in Brussels, who hid her during the war. It remained in his family's private, non-notable collection until his granddaughter consigned it to us. The private European collection isn't a lie to hide a Nazi-looted past. It's a promise to a Belgian family that didn't want their name published. The provenance is clean. She turned the monitor to face him. There it was. The scanned page from the diary. The bill of sale from 1952. The consignment contract. All cross-referenced. All perfect. Diana was breathing again. Damian Blackwood walked over to the desk. He was tall. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at Elena. His gaze was intense, analytical. It was like being examined by a high-powered microscope. He looked at her cheap dress, her worn-out flats, her unmanicured hands on the keyboard. Then he looked at her face. "You've been here how long?" he asked. 3 months, sir. And you rebuilt this entire archival system in 3 months? It wasn't a question. It was disorganized, Elena said lamely. He let the silence stretch. Then he looked at Diana. I'll take the kefir. Diana nearly collapsed. Yes, Mr. Blackwood, of course. Right away. And, he said, his gaze shifting back to Elena, I want her to handle the paperwork. He pulled a simple, heavy black business card from his pocket. It had no name, no title, just a phone number and an email address. He handed it not to Diana but to Elena. You'll invoice me through my holding company. You, he said, tapping the card, will be my only point of contact. This file and all future Blackwood acquisitions are to be managed by you, exclusively. Elena took the card. Her fingers brushed his. It was like touching a battery. And you, he said to Diana, should give her a raise. The current market rate for a senior provenance expert and archivist is about 4 times what you're paying her. Don't you think? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the gallery. The glass door hissed shut behind him, leaving a profound, vibrating silence in his wake. The next day, Elena was moved to an office. It was a glorified closet on the 3rd floor, but it had a door that closed. Her salary was, as Blackwood had suggested, quadrupled. Diana now treated her with a mixture of terror and fawning respect. The other assistants who had once sent her for coffee now asked if she needed anything. It was hollow. The victory felt strange. It wasn't hers. It had been given to her by a man who walked in and rearranged her life in 5 minutes as easily as he'd bought a $20 million painting. She was still a pawn, just a more expensive one. She threw herself into the Blackwood account. It was a fortress. The holding company, Ethelred Logistics, was designed to be impenetrable. Handling the invoice for the Kiefer was a masterclass in international art law, tax codes, and encrypted communications. Elena didn't just handle it, she optimized it. She found a loophole in the Swiss-US tax treaty that saved him 6 figures in import duties. She didn't ask, she just did it, sending the revised and filed paperwork to the email address on the black card. The reply came 2 hours later. It was one line. Well done. My car will be outside your apartment at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Elena stared at the message. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. She felt a flicker of the old fear, the helplessness. This is how it started with Mark. The dinners, the commands, the slow erosion of her own will. But she was wrong. The next morning, a sleek, unmarked black sedan was waiting. It didn't take her to a fancy breakfast. It took her to a heliport on the west side. She was bundled into a Sikorsky S-76 helicopter. And there, sitting across from her, reading a physical paper-bound book, was Damian Blackwood. Ms. Hayes, he said, not looking up. Thank you for coming. Where are we going? She asked, her voice tight. My warehouse, he said, in Teterboro. The warehouse was a nondescript climate-controlled bunker larger than a football field. It wasn't a collection. It was a library of civilization. He walked her through aisles of artifacts. Greek marbles, Egyptian sarcophagi, Renaissance bronzes. Each piece was stored with museum-quality precision. Most of this is junk, he said, waving a hand at a priceless-looking Roman bust. Elena blinked. I don't understand. It's all real, he said. The provenance is clean. It's all fine. But it's dead. It's just stuff that rich men are supposed to own. My father and grandfather collected this. I'm not a collector, Ms. Hayes. I'm a seeker. He stopped in front of a heavily secured door. I'm a seeker of things that are true, things that have been lost and found, things with a story that hasn't been told. He opened the door. The room was empty save for one painting on an easel draped in a cloth. I'm considering a new acquisition, he said. The seller is a man named Mark Vane. Elena's heart stopped. Not just slowed. Stopped. The air left her lungs. She gripped the doorframe to stay upright. He runs a global strategies firm. Blackwood continued, his back to her, watching the painting. He says he's a visionary. He's trying to broker a sale for a new client of his. He's been trying to get a meeting with me for a year. I finally granted it. He's bringing the piece here in 2 days. What is the piece? Elena managed to whisper. Her throat was full of sand. It's a painting he claims to have discovered, Blackwood said. He pulled the cloth away. Elena knew it instantly. She would have known it in the dark. She would have known it if it were shattered into a million pieces. It was a small dark portrait of a woman with sad eyes. The Lost Muse, a minor Dutch master. It was the centerpiece of her abandoned dissertation, the painting she had tracked for 5 years. The one she had written 80 pages on, proving it was the key to a whole new understanding of the artist's studio. The painting Mark Vane had told her was a dead end and a waste of time. Vane claims his research has definitively proven this is the work of... What was his name? Blackwood consulted his phone. Gerard Van Honthorst. He says it's the lost companion piece to The Procuress. He's asking for $50 million. Elena's mind was racing. Mark. How? He didn't have her research. She had taken all her files. Wait. No. She hadn't. She had backed up her entire dissertation to his cloud drive, the family drive, right before she left. She'd forgotten. In the chaos of the divorce, she had forgotten. He hadn't discovered this. He had stolen it. He had stolen her life's work, and now he was going to sell it to Damian Blackwood for $50 million. He's a very good salesman. Blackwood said, his voice neutral. His presentation is slick. He turned to look at her. His pale gray eyes missed nothing. He saw the color drain from her face. He saw the way her hands were clenched. He saw the flicker of sheer murderous rage quickly followed by a wave of profound soul-crushing despair. He knew. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew. I need, Damian Blackwood said, an expert opinion. I need to know if this painting is true. I need a provenance expert. I need you to tell me if Mark Vane's research is sound. This was it. This was the test. He was giving her a choice. She could stay silent. Let the man who destroyed her make $50 million off her back. Keep her new high-paying job. Be a good, quiet, grateful employee. Or his research. Elena said, her voice shaking but hardening into something new, something cold and sharp. Is a lie. Damian Blackwood smiled. It was a small, thin, and absolutely terrifying smile. I thought so, he said. My car is picking up Mr. Vane and his associate for a presentation at the new Sotheby's Gallery Friday at 8 p.m. You, Ms. Hayes, will be my guest. The 2 days leading up to Friday were the longest of Elena's life. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. She lived in her tiny office, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering fury that was more potent than caffeine. Damian Blackwood had given her one instruction: be prepared. He had also given her a Blackwood Holdings corporate credit card and the name of a stylist. Mr. Vane places a great deal of value on appearances, he'd said. It's his primary weakness. We will, of course, exploit that. Elena had balked, but she understood the logic. This wasn't a personal makeover. It was armor. She wasn't just Elena Hayes, the archivist. She was representing Blackwood Holdings. The stylist, a severe woman named Monique, descended on her like a military commander. When she was finished, Elena barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The thrift store sheath was gone. In its place was a deep emerald green silk wrap dress that skimmed her body, hinting at a strength she hadn't known she possessed. It was by Roland Mouret, a designer she knew from her days reading Vogue for Mark. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon, and Monique had insisted on a bold red lipstick. A declaration, she'd called it. For the first time, she didn't look like useless Elena. She looked like a woman who could and would end someone. But the real work was happening in her mind. She wasn't just going to say Mark was a liar. She was going to prove it systematically in a way that he could not escape. She went back to her own research. The 80 pages she had written. She knew it by heart. The twist, the part Mark could never have known because he didn't do the work, was that the painting wasn't by Van Honthorst. That was the red herring. That's what less educated academics thought. Her research proved it was by a contemporary, a woman, Judith Leister, a brilliant painter who had been overshadowed by her male peers, her work often misattributed to them. Proving this painting was hers would rewrite a chapter of art history. Mark, in his arrogance, had not just stolen her research, he had misinterpreted it. He had taken her initial basic findings, the maybe it's Van Honthorst section, and ignored the complex, nuanced, and brilliant conclusion. He had taken the hook and missed the story. He wasn't just a thief. He was a bad thief. This gave Elena her weapon. She didn't need to accuse him of theft. She didn't need to bring up their marriage. She just needed to let him build his entire presentation, his entire $50 million case on the wrong premise. And then she would pull the pin. She compiled her real research into a sleek digital presentation. She embedded scans of Leicester's other known works showing the identical brushwork. She included pigment analysis from a paper she'd had published under a pseudonym years ago. She built an ironclad, irrefutable case. She was not just going to expose Mark, she was going to humiliate him on a professional level he couldn't even comprehend yet. On Friday, at 7:30 p.m., the black car arrived. Elena walked out of her Astoria apartment building, the doorman staring. The car took her to the new gleaming Sotheby's headquarters. This wasn't a public auction. It was a private viewing hosted by Sotheby's for one of their most important clients, Damien Blackwood. She stepped out of the car. Damien was waiting for her not inside but on the pavement. He too was transformed. Gone was the t-shirt. He wore a stunning dark blue Tom Ford suit. He looked every inch the billionaire. He looked her up and down, his pale gray eyes approving. "Ms. Hayes, you look definitive. You look like a client," she replied. He smiled. "So I do." He offered his arm. "Are you ready?" "He's not going to know what hit him," she said. "That's the idea," Damien said. "Oh, and one more thing. I had my legal team look into Mr. Vane's new offices and his Vane Global Strategies. It's a house of cards, Elena. He's leveraged to the hilt. This $50 million sale isn't just a bonus. He needs it. He's desperate." Elena paused, her hand on his arm. This changed things. A cornered animal is the most dangerous. "Good," she said, her voice hardening. "I'm glad." They walked into the glass atrium, and there, standing under a massive chandelier, was Mark. He was schmoozing a Sotheby's executive, a glass of champagne in his hand. Beside him, clinging to his arm, was Chloe. She was wearing a red dress that was by all measures wearing her. She looked bored and beautiful. Mark was in his element. He was laughing, gesturing expansively. He was the king of the world. Then he saw them. He saw Damien Blackwood, the man he'd been chasing for a year, the man who held his entire future in his hands. And on Damien Blackwood's arm, looking like a goddess of vengeance, was his ex-wife. Mark Vane's smile didn't just fade. It shattered. Mark recovered, but it was a clumsy, visible effort. He plastered the smile back on, but it didn't reach his eyes. He disengaged from the Sotheby's exec and strode toward them, Chloe bouncing in his wake. "Damien, what a pleasure. I'm so glad we could finally make this happen." Mark stuck out his hand. Damien took it, his grip firm and brief. "Mark, thank you for arranging this." Mark's gaze flickered to Elena. It was a masterpiece of controlled condescension. He looked her up and down, taking in the dress, the hair. He was searching for the frumpy, defeated woman he'd left. This was confusing. "Elena," he said, his voice dripping with false surprise. "My goodness, you're here. Are you working the event catering?" Chloe giggled, a high-pitched tinkling sound. "Babe, that's so rude. Maybe she's his assistant." Before Elena could say a word, Damien Blackwood stepped half an inch closer to her, his arm still linked with hers. "Ms. Hayes is my senior advisor," he said, his voice a quiet chill in the warm room. "She is the only person on this continent whose opinion on 17th century art I trust. Her word is final." Mark's face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, then irritation, then a dawning, ugly suspicion. He'd been outmaneuvered, but he didn't know how. "Ah," Mark said, forcing a laugh. "Of course. Always had her little hobbies, my Elena. Well, I'm thrilled you're putting that doctorate to good use." The sneer on doctorate was unmistakable. "Shall we proceed to the viewing room?" A Sotheby's representative interrupted, sensing the tension. The room was dark, designed for drama. On a velvet-draped wall, illuminated by a single perfect spotlight, was The Lost Muse. It was beautiful, and it was Elena knew lying. "Gentlemen, Ms. Hayes." Mark began taking the floor. He was back in his element. This was his pitch. What you are looking at is not just a painting, it's a missing piece of history. For the next 20 minutes, Mark Vane spun a tale. He was good. She had to give him that. He was a brilliant storyteller, a master of an empty narrative. He used all the right words, groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting, undiscovered. And he used her words. He presented her initial research, the links to Van Honthorst, the notes on the pigment. He'd had it bound into a glossy, impressive-looking portfolio with Vane Global Strategies embossed in gold on the cover. Elena stood beside Damien, her face a mask of calm professional interest. She let him talk. She let him dig his own grave deeper and deeper. And so, Mark concluded, his voice ringing with false triumph, we have definitively a lost Van Honthorst, a companion to the Procuress. The value, of course, is, well, it's priceless. But the seller, my client, is willing to part with it for the sum we discussed, $50 million. He smiled triumphant, looking at Damien. A bargain for a piece of history. The room was silent. Damien Blackwood did not look at Mark. He did not look at the painting. He looked at Elena. Ms. Hayes, he said simply. Your opinion. This was it. Elena stepped forward. She didn't look at Mark. She addressed Damien, the Sotheby's reps, and the painting itself. It's an interesting presentation, Mr. Vane, she said. Your research is thorough, up to a point. Mark's smile tightened. Up to a point. You've correctly identified the pigment composition as being from the Utrecht school. Elena continued, her voice the calm, clear tone of a lecturer. And your analysis of the canvas is adequate. You've concluded, therefore, that it must be Van Honthorst. The evidence is overwhelming, Mark said, puffing up. The evidence is in fact overwhelmingly misleading, Elena countered. And if you had continued the research instead of stopping at the most obvious and most marketable conclusion, you would have known that. She pulled a small, sleek tablet from her clutch. May I? She nodded to the display port. Mark's face was now a mask of confusion. What is this? This, Elena said as her tablet connected and her own presentation flashed onto a screen beside the painting, is the actual research. Ms. Hayes has prepared a brief counter-analysis. Damien Blackwood supplied to the room. For the next 10 minutes, Elena didn't just debunk Mark's pitch, she annihilated it. Mark, Mr. Vane, has presented this as a Van Honthorst, but the brushwork specifically on the lace collar and the reflection in the subject's eyes is inconsistent with Honthorst's known authenticated work. He was a master of light, yes, but he was sloppy, with detail. She zoomed in on the painting, then on a known Van Honthorst. See, Honthorst's lace is a suggestion of lace. This, she zoomed back to the muse, is a photograph of lace. Every thread is perfect. Mark was starting to sweat. That just proves it's a masterpiece. It proves it's not his. Elena cut him off. It is in fact the signature authenticated brushwork of Judith Leister. She flashed 3 more paintings on the screen. Leister, Leister, and Leister. The same hands, the same rendering of light on pearls, the same precise photographic lace. You see, Mr. Vane Leister was so good that after her death, her work was systematically and often fraudulently reattributed to her male contemporaries like Frans Hals, or in this case, Van Honthorst. She was a woman. She was erased. She looked directly at Mark, her eyes like emerald chips of ice. Your research didn't just get the artist wrong. It's actively participating in the 400-year-old erasure of a female genius. You haven't found a lost muse. You've tried to bury Judith Leister, again. The room was dead silent. The Sotheby's execs were pale. This was a disaster. Mark Vane was trembling. He was exposed. He was a fool. And he knew it. He looked from the pale execs to the stone-faced Damien Blackwood. He looked at the painting, and then he looked at Elena. All his rage, all his humiliation, all his desperation coalesced into one single target. "You," he whispered. Then louder. You bitch!" Chloe gasped. "You think this is cute?" Mark snarled, his corporate mask gone, revealing the ugly, terrified man beneath. "You think you can come in here with your new dress and your billionaire boyfriend and humiliate me?" He stepped toward her. "You set me up. This was your research. You gave this to me." "I did no such thing, Mark," Elena said calmly, not flinching. "Liar. You've been planning this. You nothing. You were a housewife. You were a failed academic. I gave you a life. I gave you everything." He was shouting now, his face a blotchy red. "And you were nothing. You were a drain on me. You were an anchor. You are useless." He was screaming the word. It echoed in the pristine million-dollar room. "Useless, useless, useless." He stood there panting, a man completely undone. Elena hadn't moved. She just watched him, the last vestiges of her fear of her old life burning away in the heat of his rage. She felt nothing. He was just a loud, sad man. She was about to turn and walk away. But Damian Blackwood, who had been silent this entire time, moved. He didn't yell. He didn't rush to defend her. He simply stepped in front of Elena, shielding her, and took one calm step toward Mark Vane. Mark, faced with a man a foot taller and infinitely more powerful, flinched. Damian Blackwood looked at the trembling, broken man. He looked at the masterpiece on the wall. And then he looked back at Elena, who was watching him, her expression unreadable. He smiled, a real warm smile. He turned his head just slightly back toward Mark, but his words were for the whole room, for the Sotheby's execs, for Chloe, for history. "Mr. Vane," Damian Blackwood said, his voice quiet, clear, and utterly final. "You stand in the presence of greatness, and you call it useless." He reached out his hand, not to Mark, but back toward Elena. She took it. He brought her hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "You see a useless woman," Damian said, his voice full of a reverence that stunned the room. "I see the only person I trust. I see the expert who just saved me $50 million. I see the woman who just in 10 minutes rewrote art history." He turned her hand over and kissed her palm, a gesture so intimate, so futile, it was a brand. He looked back at the sputtering Mark, and his smile was gone. "You may leave," he said. "But the painting, my client?" Mark stammered. "Your client," Damian said, "will be hearing from my lawyers regarding your fraudulent representation, as will, I suspect, the IRS. You," he said, "are done." Mark Vane stood speechless, broken, deleted. Damian Blackwood turned his full attention back to Elena, ignoring the wreckage of the man behind him. He smiled at her, a private, shared victory. "Don't listen to him, Ms. Hayes," Damian murmured, his voice for her alone, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "He called you an anchor. He was wrong. You're a lighthouse." He raised her hand, still in his, and addressed the room. "Gentlemen, please update your records. The painting is as Ms. Hayes has proven a Leicester, and Blackwood Holdings will be acquiring it, at her valuation." He tucked her arm in his, turning them both to leave. As they passed the speechless, horrified Mark Vane, Damian Blackwood leaned in and whispered one last thing to Elena, a final coronation. "Well done, my queen." The word speechless did not begin to cover the state Mark Vane was in. It was a complete systems failure. His mouth hung open. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a cheap rental, and the color in his face had gone from enraged red to a waxy, sickly white. Chloe, to her credit, was the first to react. Realizing she was attached to a sinking ship, she made a sound of pure disgust. "Mark, you're pathetic." She grabbed her tiny purse, hiked up her red dress, and clip-clapped out of the viewing room and out of his life on her 6-inch heels. Mark didn't even notice. The Sotheby's executive, smelling blood and, more importantly, a scandal, immediately descended. Not on Mark, but on Damien and Elena. Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Hayes, our deepest apologies. We will of course honor Ms. Hayes's new provenance. A new press release, a new exhibition? Damien held up a hand. You will, he said, speak to Ms. Hayes. She is handling the acquisition. And you will, as a professional courtesy, validate her findings and ensure that her name, Elena Hayes, is the lead academic on all press materials. You are, after all, correcting a 400-year-old mistake. It's the least you can do. He guided Elena out of the room, leaving Mark Vane to the wolves. As the door hissed shut, they heard the first of the questions, the quiet, panicked legalese of the Sotheby's team realizing just how much fraud Mark had tried to commit on their premises. They were in the atrium, the city lights of New York glittering outside, when Elena finally let go of the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. You called me my queen," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. Damien turned to her. The severe billionaire, Mr. Blackwood, was gone. It was just a man, his pale gray eyes warm with something. Admiration. Respect. "A king is just a man with a crown," he said, his voice low. A queen has her own power. She moves the pieces. That's what you did in there. You were a queen. They were all playing checkers. You were playing chess. He stole my work, Damien. He stole 5 years of my life. I know, he said, and tonight you took it back, with interest. The ride down in the elevator was silent. When they were back in the car, the city sliding past in a blur of gold and white, she finally asked the question. How did you know? How did I know what? How did you know he was my ex-husband? How did you know about the research? Damien was quiet for a long time. I didn't, he said. Not for sure. When you first mentioned Vane, you said he was a visionary who wanted to connect the past to the future. That was a phrase from our old life. It was a private joke. It was what I used to say to him about my research. Elena went cold. You knew me before the gallery. No, he said. But I knew of you, or rather I knew of your work. Miss Hayes. Elena, do you remember a paper you submitted to the Dutch Quarterly Review? About 13 years ago, under the name E. Hayes. About pigment sourcing in the Utrecht school. She nodded, stunned. It was rejected. It was rejected, Damien agreed, by an old guard academic who coincidentally, I later found out, had stolen your premise for his own book. I was 28. I had just inherited my father's collection. I was trying to understand what was real and what was rich. I read your paper, the rejected paper. Someone on the review board leaked it to me. He turned to face her in the dark intimacy of the car. It was the first true thing I had read. It was brilliant. I tried to find E. Hayes. But you had vanished. You'd stopped publishing. You'd stopped existing. I assumed you'd left the field. I met Mark, she whispered. You met Mark, he affirmed, and E. Hayes disappeared. For 12 years I've had that paper, that one brilliant piece of research, pinned to my wall, a reminder of what true expertise looked like. When I walked into the Gagosian, he continued, and you, the desk assistant, corrected me on the spot about the Von Hess collection. Your voice was familiar. The logic was familiar. It was the same mind. So when Vane finally gets his meeting, Elena finished for him, and he uses my phrase. And then shows me a painting from the Utrecht school, Damien said. I knew it was either the world's biggest coincidence or he was a monster. I had to know which. You set this all up, she realized. The job, the office, the test. It was all to see if I was E. Hayes. It was, he admitted, and to see if E. Hayes was ready to come back. Elena was quiet. She was all her anger at Mark had been so hot it had burned everything else away. Now she felt a different kind of burn. This wasn't a rescue. This was a recruitment. You You didn't just give me a raise at the Gagosian, she said, the pieces clicking into place. You're a silent partner in the New York branch, aren't you? Damian Blackwood had the grace to look slightly chagrined. My name is on the letterhead. Somewhere. Elena Hayes looked at the man beside her. The man who had read her obscure rejected paper. The man who had remembered it. The man who had really seen her when she was invisible to the rest of the world, including herself. She didn't know what to say. So she did the only thing that made sense. She started to laugh. It was a small rusty sound at first. Then it grew. It was a laugh of despair, of relief, of absurdity. She was laughing for the woman who had signed those divorce papers. For the woman who had cried over stale lo mein. For the woman who had just in front of the entire art world been called my queen. Damian watched her, his expression soft. What's funny? He called me useless. She choked out tears of laughter and release streaming down her face. He really had no idea, did he? No. Damian said, his own smile finally breaking free. He really didn't. 6 months later, the Wall Street Journal ran a profile. It wasn't on Damian Blackwood. It wasn't on Mark Vane. It was on Elena Hayes. The headline read, "The Useless Wife Not Quite." Meet Elena Hayes, the art world's new power player. Mark Vane, the article briefly mentioned, was facing multiple lawsuits. His Vane Global Strategies had been a shell company, a house of cards funded by predatory loans and bad deals. The $50 million sale was his last desperate gamble. When it failed, the whole thing imploded. He was last seen moving out of his 432 Park Avenue condo in the middle of the night. But the article wasn't about Mark. It was about the new Hayes Foundation, funded by an anonymous but not so anonymous tech billionaire. A foundation dedicated to identifying and reclaiming lost female artists. Its first acquisition, The Lost Muse, by Judith Leister, now the centerpiece of a new revolutionary exhibit at the Met, curated by and credited to Elena Hayes. The Gagosian was a memory. Elena now had an office on the 70th floor of the Blackwood Holdings building, an office that she noted was twice the size of Damian's. You have more important work, he'd said with a shrug. Their relationship was a work in progress. It was not a whirlwind romance. It was something deeper and stranger and far more real. It was built on late-night arguments over pigment analysis, on shared respect, and on the quiet understanding that they were two people who had, in their own ways, been invisible for a very long time. He would come to her office at 8 p.m., not with flowers, but with a stack of new provenance files. I need your opinion, he'd say, and she would give it. The My Queen name had unfortunately stuck. His security detail called her that. His board of directors called her that. It was, she grumbled, unprofessional. But she was in his helicopter flying to see a new find in Geneva when he'd turned to her. You know, he said over the roar of the blades, you never did give me your valuation for the Leister. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to pay you. Elena looked at him. The most powerful man she'd ever met, the man who had given her back her name. You're right, she said. We should settle that. She leaned in, and for the first time she closed the distance between them. It wasn't a kiss of gratitude. It wasn't the kiss of an employee. It was the kiss of an equal. When she pulled back, she smiled. Consider it, she said, a consultant's fee. He looked for the first time since she'd met him completely and utterly speechless. And that's how Elena Hayes went from being a ghost in her own life to the queen of her new one. It wasn't just about the money or the billionaire. It was about reclaiming her voice, her work, and her own worth. Mark's humiliation wasn't the victory Elena's freedom and her power were. She proved that the useless label he put on her was never about her at all. It was just a reflection of his own fear, his own inadequacy. What did you think of her incredible comeback? Do you think Mark got what he truly deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love this story of justice and finding your power, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button so I know you want more stories just like this. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you never miss a single upload. We all deserve to be seen for who we truly are. Thanks for listening.